Hello and welcome to the Doctor Who show, rounding out the month of September. I'm Dave.
I'm Rob.
And thank you for joining us once again. We've got a lot to chat about and a new type of topic to do this month, Rob. So, stick around. We've got a lot to say.
Yes, Dave, this is going to be a weird one, listeners, because although so many other Doctor Who podcasts out there do make reviewing single stories their forte, we don't tend to do that, Dave. So this is actually new territory for us.
It is. So we're going to do a deep dive, not really a review. Certainly I haven't structured it as a review, but we're going to do a deep dive this time, not in a Doctor or a season or a monster or an era or anything like that. We're going to deep dive into a single story, but we'll talk more about that later. But should we tell the listeners what the story is, Rob?
Oh, I think we can, Dave, because we've asked for their thoughts on Twitter and Facebook and such, so some of them will know it at least.
It is. So we will be talking in depth as our main topic on the Keeper of Traken.
Yes, really looking forward to that chat.
So look, good to be back, Rob, after my month off where Richard kept the seat warm for me, and I enjoyed listening to that discussion just as a listener. It's always nice to get to do the podcast from the other side of the microphone, so to speak.
Yeah. Look, welcome back to the monthly format, Dave. But of course, you did pop back momentarily to do our special Terrence Dicks episode. Yeah,
so we should mention that because, of course, since the last monthly episode, I think everyone in Doctor Who fandom is aware that Terrence Dicks did pass away. And it has been a seismic event in Doctor Who fandom, particularly for fans of our generation, I think.
Oh, yeah, just enormous. And everyone, I don't want it to sound cliche, but everyone says the same thing because it's true. He fostered my love of reading. He taught me to read, some people say, and all this sort of stuff. It's just so sad. It
is very sad. There are few people in the world, and I think including in the world of Doctor Who specifically, whose passing can engender such consistent and overarching sadness from so many people, without any caveats, without any sort of anybody out there giving an alternate view or anyone saying, I didn't really care for him. Like, there's just a consistent, enduring sadness across fandom, which is the mark of a really, really great and lovely and wonderful man. And we celebrated, for those who aren't aware, by re-releasing the Terrence Dicks discussion of an earlier episode from earlier this year, with a new top and tail from us, Rob.
Yeah, we did. And I've got to say, Dave, it's 3 weeks or so since we did that. I feel maybe sadder and more blown away now than I did then. I don't know whether it was adrenaline. Maybe adrenaline's not the right word, but we just sort of threw ourselves into making that program and we talked about him and such. But I possibly feel sadder now.
It has been a very consistent, drawn-out period where there's been a chance to read people's thoughts as they put them together and put them out, or listen to podcasts, some of which have done what we did and put out a bit of a special episode quickly. Others waited until their next scheduled episode and then spoke about it then. So there has been this sort of long process where it really has sunk in just what a big loss this has been for fandom.
Oh, immensely. Just, as I say, blown away. I guess it had to happen someday, but it's still not a fun day when it happens.
No, but it has been very pleasant to read the various comments that have been made back to us following that special. People who've reached out to us on social media particularly, and just shared their views or shared our views. And it's been a lovely experience, albeit one very, very much tinged in sadness.
Yeah, I guess with the way fandom, Doctor Who fandom, all genre fandoms are so split these days, they put out a new logo, 50% love it, 50% hate it. We get a female Doctor, 50% love it, 50% hate it. Terrence Dicks dies, 100% of people, as you say, just saddened.
Exactly. So that's probably, I guess, the biggest news topic, and it's one that we covered in depth in a special. Life goes on, Doctor Who goes on, the podcast goes on. Rob, do you want to lead us off then with our first news item for this month?
Yeah, of course. Christopher Eccleston, as many people know, has put out his autobiography, or his memoirs, whatever you might like to call them. And naturally, the tabloid newspapers are pulling out all the salacious bits and all the bits they think will be good clickbait. Luckily for us, though, that does include his time on Doctor Who and his thoughts about Doctor Who, which is obviously what we'd probably be most interested in a Christopher Eccleston biography, or autobiography, I should say. And a couple of pieces have popped up in The Sun that I've taken notice of. One is where he talks about feeling bitter and betrayed on Doctor Who and felt that he was plunging down a well. But I think the happier part of this article, because I think we all know he didn't have a good time on the show and that's why he left, but he says he now likes going to conventions. And originally he'd sort of pulled away from them, didn't want to make any money from them, he wanted to just be an actor. But now he feels meeting fans is therapeutic. And there's a quote here, "What I've actually found is some amazing people who want to talk to me not only about Doctor Who, but our friends in the North, 28 Days Later, The Second Coming, Shallow Grave, Cracker, and so on. People bring memorabilia from across my whole career, which makes me feel good about my work and also about myself. It has healed something in me. Forget producers, forget politics. Here are real people who have seen me do my stuff and want to shake my hand." And I feel really good reading that, Dave. I think he's in a really good place with Doctor Who, but also maybe more broadly his career and such in general.
It is. There's a couple of things that really struck me about all of this that's been going on. The first of which is I don't think I really understood how big an actor and how big a name he is in the UK. I don't think he is that big a celebrity or that big a known quantity in Australia, but there's been much wider coverage and much more knowledge of his career, I think, in the UK than I expected.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pick up on this second piece, also from The Sun, they've picked out a bit where he talks about his time on Heroes. Now, I watched Heroes. Did you watch Heroes, Dave?
I didn't know.
I'd completely forgotten he was on it. I mean, this is over a decade ago now. It's post-Doctor Who. And he had a role in the show, and he talks about when he was going to a costume fitting and stuff, they were trying to get him to wear a scarf, and he suddenly twigged that they were trying to make a Doctor Who sort of analogy with him on the show, and he says he put his foot down and wasn't having it, although they did slip in a fantastic into a script later on, and he didn't pick up on that until later, and then realised, oh, geez, that was a Doctor Who reference. And he talks about, that sort of thing as well. Eccleston's not a guy who's backwards about coming forwards, it seems. If something turns up that he doesn't like, he really says his mind on it. And here he talks about that experience on Heroes, and it doesn't sound like that was a fun time either in particular. So, again, I'm glad to have read that other article about him saying he loves going to conventions and the fans are sort of helping him convalesce after such a traumatic time, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's also been very open with some health issues and mental health issues that he went through earlier in his career. Now, I don't want to dive into those because I don't have the expertise and the correct sort of language and terminology to really dive into that. Other than to say, I think it's positive that somebody who is seen as a very strong male role model, very much a man's man, brutal and frank and honest and strong, all those cliched masculine terms, to be honest about these sort of conditions. And if you're interested in that, listeners, I invite you to just have a look on the internet and have a look at articles written and discussed in far better terms than I think I could.
Yeah, indeed, and if you really like the sound of it, do grab the memoir. It's called I Love the Bones of You. Yes,
I'll certainly be grabbing it at some point. Another piece of sad news, I guess, but unusual news, Rob, and that is the death of a man by the name of David Boyle in the UK, who may not be a name instantly familiar to fans, but his work, I suspect, he's the man who was responsible for many years for the Blackpool Doctor Who exhibition and indeed the Llangollen Doctor Who exhibition. Now, this article says that's what he's mostly known for, but I would actually argue that what he's mostly known for is as the guy who founded and ran Dapol for many, many years.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, that second place you mentioned, which I won't try to pronounce because that's in Wales, isn't it? Is Llangollen?
Llangollen.
Yes. That's where the Dapol factory wasn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
So he had the sort of exhibition alongside the factory, I think, over there. And this, of course, is all pre-Doctor Who experience, people. This is like, in the 80s and such, you'll hear fans talk about going down to see the Blackpool exhibition and things like that. it's strange how fans can become so well known like this over a period of time. But the effort he put in to keep the show going, you have all these fans in the UK through the Wilderness years in particular who all do their part. And they all do little bits, and it just kept the show going. And I think that's remarkable, and I'm pleased we're sort of noting him here on the episode today.
Yes, I think my view was he did exhibitions before they were trendy.
Yes.
He did model figures before they were sexy, and everybody collected them. So he really did keep these things going in a time when it wasn't easy, and I suspect it wasn't as profitable as it is today. And so, yeah, worth mentioning him on his passing.
Yeah, Wale. Moving along, this is one that probably everyone knows by now, but we haven't mentioned it on one of our monthly shows, so let's mention it now, Dave. And that's the next UK Blu-ray release will be Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred in season 26.
Yes, exciting news. I think news that will not surprise anybody. I think anybody who was speculating on what seasons were going to come out pretty much knew that season 26 was going to be up there. It's a very well-regarded season, and a season with stories you can do a lot with on the DVD range. I want to say, Rob, this is the first time that the announcement trailer for a box set has actually kind of got me excited. The other ones I know people have been big fans of, and so they worked for some. You know, there was Colin Baker reenacting parts of the trials when out season 23 and all that, and they were nice, but this one, which was all centred around Ace as an adult now in London and what she's doing, that really just hit my nostalgia bone absolutely square on. And seeing Sophie Aldred again, who is one of the first real A-list Doctor Who people that I really actually met properly and got to spend real time with her when we ran a convention with her in 1997 down in Melbourne. You know, this just all, it just really hit me in the right way. I thought it was a lovely little trailer.
Yeah, look, Dave, I hear, because the Sylvester McCoy era came along at a certain time for me in my life. I'm a few years ahead of you, but for both of us, I think we were watching it at the same time at a similar age. And, of course, you're a big fan of the NAs, where Ace played a big part.
Yes.
And you know, and obviously you met her and had a convention with her and so on that you were running. I get all of that. First of all, I'll say I liked the trailer, don't get me wrong. But the reaction to it online was a wee bit over the top, and I found myself disagreeing with it to some degree. Can I talk about that?
Yeah, no, let's do that.
Okay, because this trailer, I watched it before I'd seen a lot of the hype online, and I thought, oh, that's nice. They've got Sophie Aldred looking out of a window, doing a bit of a narration, there's some music, and it's basically a clip show. All the old clips that we've seen before, and then, you know, a shadow appears at the door with an umbrella, and it's obviously not Sylvester, but we believe it's Sylvester. We're meant to believe it's Sylvester. And I thought, yeah, that was kind of cute. You know, a bit twee, but a bit cute. I get online, and people say, oh my God, Pete McTighe has scripted the most amazing comeback for Sophie and Sylvester. If this doesn't become a series soon, I don't know what's wrong with the world. And I'm like, jeez, did we watch the same thing? Like, I thought it was just a bunch of clips with a bit of a voiceover and Sophie staring out a window, you know? It wasn't that profound. It was nice. I liked it. But was it that profound? I didn't think so.
No, Look, I wasn't that excited, but I'm not the most excitable of people, as you know, Rob. But,
yes.
But I also did sort of have that moment of, gee, I would love to see Sophie Aldred as Ace again in some sort of series, or, you know, in a guest role in the show now. I just think it's because her character was so different and so interesting, and really, you know, this is not a new observation, changed the template of the companion in such a way that really did move us from the classic series and set us up for the companions of the new series. And she just looked so stunning. And it was just so easy to imagine her doing it in a way that you look at some companions where they come back and sort of, you know, refill the role 40 or 50 years later. Go, look, it's lovely they're doing it, but they're nothing like what they, you know. Let's not pretend they could just step back in the role. Like, oh my God, Jamie's barely changed. Like, I love Fraser Hines, but no, you know, I don't have the desire to see Fraser Hines as Jamie again. Whereas this one, it just felt so right. I thought, yeah, you could do it in the way that we had Liz Sladen step back in so wonderfully in the series, and then her own series. Katie Manning, I don't think was as effective as Liz Sladen, but again, when she turned up in the Sarah Jane Adventures, that she stepped into that role very well, and I think Sophie Aldred could do the same, and I think it's fair enough to be excited. And look, maybe as well, to go back to our opening point, in a week sort of when Terrence Sticks had passed away, I think it was something that fans could be very happy and positive about, and so I think a lot of people did embrace that.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. And on Sophie, I think looks has a lot to do with it. You know, she's maintained, although she's grown up and must be in her 50s, I don't know, mid-50s by now.
Yeah.
She's maintained a bit of a girlish look, and just has that feisty companion look to her still, you know. And as you say, some of the companions lose that. Liz Sladen didn't lose it. She still looked a bit like Sarah Jane, whereas Katie Manning has aged. You know, and I get that she doesn't look quite as Jo Grantish as Liz Sladen still looked Sarah Jane-ish, if I can put it that way. Mm-hmm. But Sophie's kept the look, although she's matured, and the voice. She still does the voice really well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big part of it too.
Speaking of Blu-rays, we have a update for our Australian listeners. A lot of Australian listeners have noticed, and certainly we and our friends have noticed, that just as we were expecting the Season 10 Blu-ray to come out, and we were all waiting to be able to pre-order it and everything, it suddenly disappeared from all the commercial websites and the mail order websites, and we all wondered what's going on. What we discovered is that the company with the contract to release BBC DVDs and Blu-rays in Australia has actually switched. It's gone over from Roadshow, who've had it for decades, to Universal Sony Pictures Home Entertainment Australia.
Yeah, that's right. Because as you say, these things were available briefly for pre-order, but then quickly disappeared. So they were never released here, folks. So we're currently behind. How many are we behind now? We're behind the Season 10, the Season 23.
We're one behind now. We're about to become two behind.
Right. Okay. And soon, I guess, if Universal doesn't get its act into gear, we'll be a third one behind with the Sylvester one we were just talking about.
That's right. So there's been a big delay as one company has stopped making Doctor Who Blu-rays and another needs to actually get up and start making that process. But we have confirmed, and thanks to our friends at 42 to Doomsday who flicked this through to me last night, Season 10 will come out in Australia on the 13th of November. Season 23 will come out on the 4th of December. And we will get the others fairly soon in the new year. And the packaging will be the same format and design as the Season 18 Blu-ray release in Australia.
Which is slightly controversial because it is slightly different to the UK packaging.
It is. I must admit, I don't care that much. I mean, they'll sit on my shelves and I'll admire them and my cat will admire them, but beyond that, I don't think anyone's really going to be judging me by my Doctor Who DVDs or Blu-rays. I know that people who take these collections very seriously are going to, I think, stick to or go back to the UK releases for that consistency of packaging. But look, I'm just very happy that they're finally going to be out. I've been waiting for Season 10 for months.
Yeah, exactly. And for reference, when we're talking about the packaging, folks, think of the UK packaging mine as the little boxy area that the disc trays sit in. So you have a front and a back, and they open up to reveal the trays, but the trays aren't protected along the top, the side, or the bottom in their own little box. It's unless you use the box that they come in, of course, at the shop.
Yeah, there's a little sort of slip cover sort of box thing.
A slip cover, yeah.
Very, very thin, very, very, almost papery, yeah.
Yeah, so they still look pretty good, and they still look, I don't know, 90% of what the UK ones look like. They're certainly not like the US releases that are in just regular Blu-ray boxes. Yeah. They're still fairly special, but they're just not as...
Yeah, they're just not as solid.
Yeah, I would say that too.
But yeah, no, good news, they'll be coming out, so hopefully we can order those very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we move into the mini topics for this episode, Dave?
Yes, we shall, and two of which relate to my recent trip overseas.
Very good.
So I'll start off with one of them, and I spent the majority of my time overseas in Italy. I did spend a bit of time in London, and that was lovely, and London's a lovely city to be in. I've got many great friends and I had many great times and some experiences and all the rest of it. But as a Doctor Who fan as well, you walk around London and just everything's a Doctor Who reference. You know, there's the bridge from Dalek Invasion of Earth. There's the post office tower. There's where the Scarrison came up in the Zygons. There's the what's it called? The spinning wheel from Rose. London Eye. The London Eye. You know, like, and then you.
I'll tell you a funny story, Dave. A PR company I once worked for, its London office was in the same office that was used in the Invasion.
Oh, wow.
How weird is that? And I always had these fantasies that I'd get sent over to the London office for some reason, and I'd get to like actually work inside that office building. Never actually happened, but yeah, there you go.
And then you catch the London Underground, and, you know, there's Marble Arch Station, so that's a Mysterious Planet reference, and then there's Covent Garden Station, so that's a Web of Fear reference, or even just, you know, the Gloucester Road, you go, well, that's where Rumpole used to catch the train every morning to go to work at the temple. You know?
Yes.
You know, it's just so wonderful. But most of my time was in Italy, and I went to Rome for the first time. And, you know, I went to Rome on its own merits, not just because it was in a Doctor Who story that I'm a fan of. But it did occur to me that I have now visited a number of the locations of Doctor Who historicals, which, as you and long-time listeners will know, is a particular favourite era and genre of mine in the show. And I actually made a list of all the historical stories and worked out which locations or settings I'd been to. Now, of the classic historicals, I've been to 7 of the 11 of the settings, including a couple of the tougher ones. I think the ancient port of Jaffa from the Crusades would be probably the rarest one I've been to, and, you know, I've done Cornwall and Culloden and Paris and now Rome. I think that Asia Minor and the location of Troy will be the hardest one to tick off.
Yes.
Although again, what do you tick off for Marco Polo? Like, if we just go to Beijing, does that count? Because, you know, the last episode set in Peking, or do you have to start on the plain of Pamir and work your way through Lop and Shangtu all the way to Peking? I'm not sure, but a couple of locations or settings I'm hoping to get to next year, so I might tick off a couple more. But of course, I did go to Pompeii, which is the unambiguous setting of the Doctor Who story, The Fires of Pompeii.
That's right.
Which I did go and watch after visiting, which I hadn't seen for a long time. And it's fascinating to sort of look at the bits that they've done correctly and the bits that they've used a bit of poetic license. Fascinating that the Doctor quotes the date that they're there and says, oh, we're only a couple of days away from the date of the eruption. Research since that episode was made actually suggests that date was wrong. It occurred in October rather than August, because they have just this year found a coin that could only have been minted after August of that year. So therefore the eruption must have been later, and so the alternate date people have suggested of October now seems the more likely date. So just interesting that that all happened. But yeah, it's fascinating. Doctor Who has long inspired my love of history, and I'm getting to see some of these settings for myself.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, Doctor Who inspires so much in people, whether it's that love of history, love of science, love of writing, or being on TV. You know, it's inspired fans in so many different ways. It's really great.
It is, but I did sort of, you know, walk around the Colosseum and some of the ruins in Rome, and I was thinking of moments from the Romans, which is a story I love. So There you go.
Oh, that's wonderful. Moving quickly on to my mini topic for this episode, Dave, we've recently had the Emmys, and there was all the fun and frolics of an Emmys, but I was particularly taken with Phoebe Waller-Bridge winning a bunch of stuff for Fleabag, which is a show on Amazon. Obviously, Phoebe Waller-Bridge has done a lot more than just Fleabag. She was the voice of the robot in Solo. She wrote and I think produced Killing Eve. She's currently the script doctor on the new James Bond film that's coming out. She's just signed a big Amazon deal. She is a big deal. She can act, she can write, she can produce. She's a script doctor. She can do it all. And at one stage, a couple of years ago, she was a potential doctor. When people were talking about, oh, well, it's probably going to be a female doctor. If it is a female doctor, who will it be? Jodie Whittaker's name was being kicked around, Olivia Colman's name was being kicked around, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge was being kicked around. And
I remember you were quite excited at that notion at the time, Rob.
I certainly was, you know, and here I am, maybe justified that, yes, she really is a talent, she really is quite good, and she's winning all these awards. What it probably means, though, is she'll never be involved with Doctor Who now because she's too big for it.
Yeah.
And I just, as I think I said on Twitter recently, you know, dare to dream what could have been if she was like the 13th Doctor instead of Jodie. I think she would have been more quirky and had more presence, and maybe could have even been involved with some of the writing, such as her interest in that sort of thing. I think we even had a friend of the show commenting to us that, what if she ended up being the showrunner of Doctor Who? And it's like, well, she's got the talent for it. I just don't know if she's interested in it or is maybe just a bit too big for it these days. But yeah, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, what a talent. And, oh man, if she had been the Doctor, I think we would have been having some happy days.
Look, I don't think she would have done a bad job. Whether it would have been better or worse than Jodie Whittaker, I mean, that's hypothetical, and how much of the problems with Jodie's Doctor are down to the writing, not the actress, I think is an important question. But yeah, it's a definite path not travelled that's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, I just think about, as I said, her quirky side, Dave. I mean, Jodie can do sort of zany and sub David Tennant and that sort of thing, but Phoebe Waller-Bridge can do really, really quirky, and it's... I won't go on about it, but I do think she would have been a great Doctor.
Maybe when she's sort of at the other end of her career and she's got a bit of a quieter patch, maybe she'll be the 18th Doctor.
Yeah, maybe. For example, people have thrown around Michael Sheen's name as a Doctor, and it was like, oh no, he's a bit too big for that. He's off doing Frost Nixon or, whatever. But now that he's gone back to TV and he's done Good Omens and he's worked with Neil Gaiman, it's almost like Michael Sheen might be heading back towards Doctor Who again as he's gotten a bit older. So I know what you mean, as these actors sort of have that trajectory as it sort of dips again and they come back to TV and all that sort of stuff. Maybe.
Yes, maybe. Another joy of travelling is that you spend a lot of time at airports and on planes and trains, and also just relaxing, so you get to do a bit more just reading for fun. And I did pull a few Virgin New Adventures off the shelf to take with me, and I did reread them and thoroughly enjoyed them again. I read Exodus for probably the fourth time, and I didn't know at that stage that Terrance Dicks was going to pass away shortly after I got home, but that is a remarkably good book, and it is the one that I think really highlighted to people who are a little bit cynical about the Tiger books that he wrote, just how good a writer he was, particularly when unconstrained by a page count and a budget. I reread David Banks's Iceberg,
yes,
which is the return of the Cybermen in the McCoy era. Much better written than I remembered, and really a very good book. It is very slow to start because it spends a lot of time setting up worlds and characters and that sort of thing. And you can sort of imagine probably the first half of the book would have very easily just made part one of a McCoy three-parter, and then the other half would work very well as the next two parts. So that was fun. And David A. McGinty's First Frontier, which is the first of his Master trilogy, which I also really enjoyed. McGinty is a very talented writer and someone who really gets the show. So nice to just have a chance to chill and read a few of those.
Yeah, McGinty, a couple of his books have come through my letterbox recently. I picked up The Dark Path. I may have mentioned that to Richard on the last monthly show.
Yes.
And also The Shadow of Wang Chiang has recently dropped here.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, as I seek to now get all of the missing adventures as well.
A final little mini topic, which is unrelated to my travels. Of course, Rob, Doctor Who fans are a little bit obsessed and very knowledgeable about the missing episodes of Doctor Who. But Doctor Who is not the only series that has missing episodes. Another very popular series that does, of course, is Dad's Army, which had 3 missing episodes. Still does, in fact. And what the BBC have done in the last few months is they've taken the scripts for these 3 missing episodes and remade them.
Yeah.
So they've cast new people who all sort of look and act vaguely like the original cast. They've rebuilt the sets and they've made these 3 new episodes. Now, I've watched 2 of them. The first thing I'll say is the love and the care and the attention that has gone into remaking them is incredible. The sets look like exactly how you remember them from the original series of Dad's Army. Now, of course, because of this, a lot of fans are saying, well, could Doctor Who do the same? And look, of course it could, but I must say my experience watching these episodes was one of enjoyment, but a real sort of limited enjoyment, because I always felt as though I was reaching for something I couldn't quite grasp. The actors are all very good, the cast is very good, but they always feel as though they're just reaching to be someone else. It's not quite John LeMessurier playing Sergeant Wilson. And you always sort of feel that little bit of, I'm just not quite there. I've got to say the best is probably Timothy West, who plays Private Godfrey. He's remarkably good. And yeah, there's nothing bad about it. They're interesting to see, but I suspect if they did go and, for example, remake The Massacre or the Daleks' Master Plan in this way, fans would be interested in it, but maybe a little disappointed because it's never going to quite be what they want. It's always going to be just a little far away, a little out of reach.
Yeah, it's not the real thing at the end of the day. It's a pastiche. I'm not too interested in it myself. Again, on some sort of intellectual level, it could be interesting. Like, look how they've recreated the set, look how they've recreated the costume and such. But I think back to something like, what was the 50th anniversary story that Gatiss did, Adventures in Time and Space, or what was that?
An Adventure in Space and Time.
That's the one. And you just look, they've recast all the old characters, and we see little clips from episodes, and you think, oh, that could have been what that episode looks like. Oh, but I don't think I'd like to have seen the whole episode redone. It was just fun to see the behind the scenes of one scene, perhaps, of one episode. I'm not too interested in it myself. It's a very fanish thing. And even if I, as a fan, aren't particularly interested, I don't know what that'd say for the viewing figures.
Yes, I mean, the Dad's Army specials, I believe, did rate very, very well. Whether there's something that'll be in sort of continual circulation, I don't know. But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting point, given that we talk a lot about missing episodes as Doctor Who fans.
Yeah, and I guess Dad's Army doesn't have to compete with the fact that the show continued for so many years and still has a modern version out there, and an ever-growing fan base of young people and stuff. It's a completely different sort of audience, I think, for that.
Yeah, I mean, Dad's Army is now just pure golden oldie nostalgia television.
Yeah, exactly.
With that, let's move into our main topic, Rob. So you had the suggestion that, as something different, we would do a deep dive into one particular story. And I said I was very interested in doing that. And I had the stipulation that I think you agreed with very, very quickly and supportively, that it had to be a story that wasn't one that's talked about a lot. It should be one of those classics we all talk about. It shouldn't be one of those less than well-respected or well-regarded stories that we all talk about. Something that's maybe a little bit off the wall. And The Keeper of Traken appealed to both of us as being one of those stories that I think is kind of lost a little bit in this great 7-season epic that is the Tom Baker years. So we decided to talk about that.
It also gave me a chance to crack open my new Blu-ray set.
That's true as well. And it's interesting to note, our friends over at the Diddly Dum podcast, a couple of episodes did a special on the Tom Baker era where they asked their audience to vote for their top 5 favourite Tom Baker stories. And The Keeper of Traken got no votes.
None.
Now, I suspect that's because whilst it's not in anybody's top 5, it's probably in a lot of people's top 10 or top 15. But it's not one of those instant top 5 Tom classics that you reach for. It's a little bit, forgotten's too strong a word, but a little bit forgotten.
Is it because of what else is going on in that season, and that it's the penultimate episode before Legopolis? Is it just its position in the Tom Baker pantheon?
Yeah, I think that's part of it as well. I think it's also not part of the Hinchcliffe era, which, if somebody says to you, what are your top 5 Toms, I think for a lot of people, the first place you go is the Hinchcliffe era.
Yes. Oh, without doubt.
And for others, they'll say, I'm also a big fan of the Williams era, and they'll go grab City of Death or whatever it might be out of that. But a lot of people, I guess, sort of forget that there's this wonderful adjunct to the Tom Baker era, which is season 18, one of my top 3 classic seasons. I love this season. And it does sort of sit in there, and it's not the Leisure Hive, which is the big new, wow, Doctor Who's changed, and it's not Legopolis, it's not part of the East Space trilogy, and Lala Ward's not in it, and yeah, it gets forgotten. So before we dive in too far, Rob, I'm going to ask you, what are your memories of this story?
Dave, I would have seen this around the mid-80s, probably around age 10 or 11 or something like that, and I initially, and I have felt this way about other Doctor Who shows I've come to really love over time, I was a little bored by it. I didn't quite... Well, I understood what was going on, but I didn't quite get why it was interesting. if that makes any sense.
Right.
And I also thought the Master didn't look as good as the last time I'd seen him in Deadly Assassin. And so I kind of wrote it off as being a bit, but I've subsequently changed my mind about it. I do quite like it these days, but I'll cut off there and ask you the same question.
So I've gone back and actually looked up some dates, and I would have first seen this in May of 1984. Now I don't remember it, but do you remember, Rob, back when season 21 went out in Australia for the first time?
Yes.
And they got to the end of the Planet of Fire, and the censors still hadn't released Caves of Androzani for viewing. They still go, how the hell do we show this at 6 o'clock? Like, what? So the ABC just said, anyway, look, we don't have anything more for you. We're going back to the Leisure Hive and going to show you season 18 again. And I remember that season going out. I don't really remember the Keeper of Traken from that, but I would have seen it. But my real memories come from May of 1988, when the ABC repeated most of the Tom Baker era on Saturday afternoons. Now, I got this in Melbourne as 2 episodes, so parts 1 and 2 were broadcast in an omnibus format one week, and then the next week parts 3 and 4 as an omnibus. So I didn't know the cliffhangers of parts 1 and 3 for many, many years. Rob, in Sydney, you would have got this as a complete omnibus, one 90-minute episode on a Saturday afternoon, and you would have got it in March of 1988.
Yeah, I was scratching my head there, Dave, as you were talking, because I was thinking, I remember the omnibus stuff, but I don't remember them being in 2 parts. I remember it just being in like 1 part. So did we get a different sort of omnibus here in Sydney to you?
You did. You got everything in omnibus. We got most things in double episodes.
Right, okay, yeah, because I remember taping things off screen and having like Planet of Fire as this 90-minute movie, as I've described it in the past, and I think that contributes to my love for it, because I think of it as a movie, being out there on location and having seen it as that kind of omnibus. But I guess we're digressing from Keeper of Traken, but that's really interesting, actually.
Yeah, it brought back some memories for me, and I've got to say I'm the opposite to you, Rob. I would have been not quite 8 when I saw this, and well and truly involved in being a Doctor Who fan by that age, and I really adored this. And the things that I adored about it then, I still adore about it now, and that is the look and the feel and the excitement of it. I think I've mentioned before that, particularly as a kid, I wanted Doctor Who to be gleaming metal and flashing lights. And Keeper of Traken gives you that. You've got the source manipulated machine and the imagery of the Keeper and the flame behind the Keeper. And all these little things that I really liked. It looks great and it feels like an adventure. As I've grown up, I still love those things, but there have been other things I like that I have come to appreciate.
Yeah, I was cogitating on this earlier today, and I was thinking, at the time, I was a Star Wars kid, and Star Wars is very much, science fantasy. And I think Keeper of Traken is science fantasy writ large. The sort of society they have. They're getting around in these sort of Shakespearean costumes, and the way their society is set up and so on. And yet they're also extremely technological, well in advance of us here on Earth today. And it's that interesting juxtaposition, that gives it this fairy tale, science fantasy kind of feel that I really like now. And I just don't know why I didn't like it at the time, because I love Star Wars and I love the science fantasy feel of Star Wars.
That's interesting. I mean, there's not a lot of spaceships and robots and that sort of thing, which maybe as a kid we do look for. And even the Melker, as wonderful a design as it is, couldn't really be called a monster in the traditional Doctor Who sense. So it is lacking that. But it occurs to me, literally just as we're talking, this does kind of pull in some ways from the best of the 3 different sub-eras of Tom's era, because in the same way that the Hinchcliffe era would say, right, this week we're doing Frankenstein, and this week we're doing Sherlock Holmes in London, and this week we're doing King Kong. This week, The Keeper of Traken is doing Shakespeare, it's doing The Tempest, it's doing Macbeth. And it also takes that literary sort of influences that the Williams era really has and puts them in. And it is a very literarily aware episode. But it's also got the Christopher H. Bidmead, let's have real science in there, or at least real scientific terms and concepts in there. And it kind of blends them all together in a real wonderful sort of best of the Tom Baker era vibe, I think.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And look, you mentioned the Melker there. Can we, I guess we can just dive in and talk about anything. So can we talk about the Melker and what it is? Because I think I was confused by this as a child, and when I was rewatching it again this week, I was having to still put it together in my head. The Master and his TARDIS is inside the Melker, yes?
I'm not sure.
You're not... Well, see, here we go. You're not sure. To me, the TARDIS is inside the Melker, and the Melker is some kind of machine that is almost TARDIS-like, because obviously the Master's in it, there's a control room and such, and his viewport is even like the Melker's eyes, so I don't know whether the Master's shrunk down inside it to be looking out of the eyes like that, or whether it's just, just the way it's set up. And I took it to be that the Melkers arrived there, and maybe the Master has stayed inside in his TARDIS, inside the Melker, while he not regenerates, but sort of recovers a bit from when we last saw him in Deadly Assassin, which is why he's maybe a little more human looking in this episode than the cadaverous version in Deadly Assassin. Am I making any sense? Is this how you've thought of it, Dave, or have I got head canon going on?
Some of it I agree with you, and some of it is a completely new concept to me, which is interesting. I do think that the idea of him being more human looking is a real genuine story-based one. At the end of Deadly Assassin, the Doctor very clearly says that there was lots of energy coming out of the Eye of Harmony, and the Master was wearing the sash, would have absorbed it. So I think that he has renewed himself in that sense. I thought there were two possibilities about what the Master's doing here. One is that his TARDIS is disguised as the Melker, and 20-odd years ago he arrived at Traken and just sat there and waited for his plan to come to fruition and the moment for the Keeper to die. Which works, but given the Master would know when the Keeper was going to die, because it's all history to a Time Lord, why didn't he not just come out 6 months before, 3 days before?
Yeah.
And part of that's because he wants to ingratiate himself with and manipulate Cassia, but 20 years seems a long time. The other option is that the Melker is just one of these evil entities that gets captured in the orbit of, or the influence of Traken, and it comes down and it becomes a statue in the Grove, and it's implied that happens a lot. There are lots of Melkers on across the Traken Union that are just evil entities that get trapped there.
And do we take that to be... Sorry to interrupt. Do we take that to be a name? They don't all look like the Melker. They could look like a lot of different things. It's just evil things that are being pulled in and calcified like that?
I think so.
Yeah.
And at some point in that 20 years, the Master has replaced this actual Melker with his TARDIS disguised as the Melker. So maybe he wasn't there for 20 years. He did just sort of come along 6 months earlier and prepared his plan. But, I mean, this is all clearly because the Master wasn't in the original concept. And in fact, up to the point where Johnny Byrne, the writer, submitted his scripts, the Master wasn't in it. The Master was inserted at J&T's request by Christopher Bidmead as the script editor once Johnny Byrne had gone on holiday. So I don't think the concept really quite works that way. The Master has been inserted into an existing story.
Okay, so this might explain why inside the Melker it's more of a traditional sort of control panel. It doesn't look like a TARDIS at all, which is why I was thinking it might have been a separate thing to the Master's TARDIS, because clearly the Master is using that control panel, but it's not in his TARDIS, I don't think.
I always assumed it was, but now I'm doubting that.
Yeah, because it just doesn't seem like it. It's more of a traditional control panel with, like, as I say, you're looking out the eyes of the Melker.
That's true. That is true. But it does dematerialise and rematerialise like a TARDIS would, and with the sound effect.
Yes, although when it lands on the planet, it doesn't land like a TARDIS, Dave.
No, which I guess either implies that my second theory is correct, or simply that the production team is just fudging it, because if it did arrive like a TARDIS, that would kind of give away the ending.
That is true. So let's go with fudge.
Let's go with fudge. I wanted to make a big point early in this discussion, Rob, and that is, as I look at this story, it is in many ways, structurally particularly, a very unusual Doctor Who story, particularly for the classic era.
Tell me more.
Let me give you a couple of dot points. It is a very rare occasion in Doctor Who where we get, at least in part 1, a non-linear narrative. Mm-hmm. We get story told in flashback, which I struggle to think of another occasion in Doctor Who where that happens in the classic era.
Yeah, and for people who haven't seen the episode, but you're still listening to us talk about it, you've got the Doctor and Adric on the TARDIS watching scenes that the Keeper has appeared inside the TARDIS and is showing them scenes on the TARDIS viewfinder.
Yes, this is what happened last month sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then eventually the two plots catch up to each other. It's a story that ends on an overt downbeat cliffhanger.
Well, yeah, you think it's going to end pretty well until the final moments.
Yeah, it gives you a whole lot, So you get that traditional end of part 4, or however many episodes there are, but end of part 4 scene of everybody's happy and the Doctor and his companion have headed off into the next adventure, and they get a bit of a tag scene in the TARDIS. You think, oh, okay, well, that's a traditional ending. Then it cuts back to Traken, and suddenly the Master's TARDIS is there, and suddenly the Master's there, and suddenly Tremas is killed or taken over, and then Nyssa comes down, Father, where are you? Cut to credits.
Yeah.
That's a very unusual thing for a Doctor Who story to end like that and overtly set up the next story.
It's unusual, it's bleak, and something I read about this recently, Dave, when you think about it, the Doctor, I can't think of any other time where the Doctor has saved the day on a planet and left, and in the very next story that planet has been destroyed. But that's what happens with Traken. Yeah,
well, not just the planet, the whole Traken Union, all the planets.
Yeah.
The whole of Matilla Orionsis is destroyed, so that is unique as well. The Keeper bringing the Doctor to Gallifrey. Although we've had the Doctor summoned a couple of times, by the Time Lords or by an emergency beacon or something like that, the idea of somebody just popping into the TARDIS and saying, hey, Doctor, come and help me out, and the Doctor going, okay, we're off to Traken then. That's an unusual way to start a story.
It is. I mean, it suggests a godlike sort of power, although it does happen in Greatest Show in the Galaxy as well, where it clearly wasn't a godlike power that could invade the TARDIS. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other for me there.
Well, it's unique enough of a power for the Doctor to go, the fact you did this and you're sitting in a chair suggests you must be the Keeper of Traken.
Yes. Also, just thinking of those early scenes, Dave, where the Doctor pulls out those old books and he's got himself and Adric reading them to read up, I think, on information on Traken, if I recall what I watched just earlier this week. God, my memory's terrible. Do you think the Hartnell Doctor wrote those journals?
It's a very Hartnell type thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, like as an explorer in the universe might have started those journals and wrote things down in a very dry sort of way.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah.
And the final unusual point I want to make is that this is the Doctor and a male companion, and that's it.
Yeah, and don't they work well together?
They work so well together. This, possibly Logopoulos, but if not Logopoulos, I think this is Matthew Waterhouse's best story in the role. And the relationship he has with Tom Baker, and the relationship those two characters have, is so wonderful. And this is to me what I think of when I think of Adric. And this is where the character of Adric really works. Matthew Waterhouse has given material he's very comfortable with and very able to do. He clearly works well acting alongside Tom Baker. He then works very well both as a character and as an actor working alongside Sarah Sutton as Nyssa.
Or Nyssa, as he calls her at one stage.
That's right. But yeah, look, I think this is a really good story for Adric, and it's a real shame. This is one of those combinations like the Fifth Doctor and Perry that I think I just wish we could have had just a few more stories of this.
Yeah, it's interesting. If we got a few more stories, maybe the magic would have worn off. Maybe the magic's there because it is just this one outing and it worked, reasonably well. Because I do agree with you completely, Dave, that the way these two get on is great. In fact, at times, because we know what was happening off screen, that Tom was a cranky old bugger and he didn't particularly like Matthew Waterhouse and such, I kept watching this and sort of cringing, thinking, we're going to have a scene where he's not going to be looking at Matthew properly, or they're not going to bounce off each other very well. But no, all their interactions in this are really fantastic. Adric is not annoying at all. He does go well with Sarah Sutton. Although I do say if we had more of it, could the magic have worn off? I don't know.
Look, maybe. The other thing that, of course, is important is, for the first time since Adric joined the TARDIS crew, Lalla Ward is not there.
That's true too.
Now, I'm a big fan of Lalla Ward and Romana, the character, but we all know a lot of the tensions around Tom in that year were to do with his turbulent relationship with Lalla Ward that I think Matthew Waterhouse, and he's written in his autobiography, Blue Box Boy, a very good book. He's written in there that sometimes he was just this guy on the set just stuck between Tom Baker and Lalla Ward having a massive lovers' quarrel. And, what do? You're an 18-year-old, 19-year-old actor, and you two more senior regular cast are having relationship problems in front of you, bringing it onto the set. And, we know Tom brought this onto the set.
Yeah.
And now that's been removed, and I think maybe that does allow Matthew Waterhouse as well to relax a bit, and Tom to relax a bit as well. And Waterhouse does talk about that in his autobiography, just what it was like to work with Tom in that year.
Yeah, big thumbs up for Tom and Matthew in this episode.
Yeah, I've spoken in praise of Matthew, but I need to mention Tom as well. This to me is, I hesitate to say it because there's so many good Toms, but I think this is my favourite Tom. I really like him in this season. I think the slightly older look works very well for him. The increased world weariness works really well for him, but he's still got that spark. He's still got that wonderful love of life. And that scene you mentioned earlier, Rob, where they're going through the journals and talking about the Doctor's prose style and all that sort of thing, that's a lovely scene, and Tom's really tender and funny in that, and he gets other moments like that as well. But at the other end of the scale, the moment he has in part 3, I think it is, maybe part 4, where he's asking Tremas for the plans to the source manipulator, and Tremas is like, I can't give you that. I swore an oath that I would never hand those over. And the way Tom plays that, he doesn't get angry, or he doesn't get loud and blustery. Just, well, that's fine. That's fine. Melkor will take over Traken. Thousands will die. The Empire will be in ruins. But that's okay, because you'll have kept your honour intact. Yes. He plays it so well.
He does.
And his craziness from the previous season has been reined in, and I love the costume as well. So, as I say, there's a lot of good Tom. There's a lot of enjoyable Tom across the 7 years, but I think this is my favourite version of Tom.
That's interesting, because he doesn't look 100% well. The hair has straightened out in a lot of areas. He turns sideways at different times, and I think, my God, he is so thin. Like, he doesn't look like the bigger, bulkier sort of man that I think of from earlier seasons. And I think he had some health issues around State of Decay, for example.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, State of Decay was the story where he had to have his hair curled because it was so flat.
Yeah, and even here, his hair's a bit off. He looks really thin. The costume, I don't mind it. I'd love to get rid of the question marks on the collar. That's still one of my bugbears of it. True. But, as an ensemble, it's pretty good. I like the long boots. I like the coat. I think it does suit him. It's not a bad costume by any means. Is it my favourite Tom Baker? I couldn't go that far, Dave, but it's interesting and it's mature, and I like those aspects of it.
Shall I give you something that I don't like about the story?
Yeah, please.
I think the music is horrible.
Oh, I'm so glad you said this, because aside from the really well-known and popular little Traken theme that you hear towards the start of the story when we first see the court, you probably know the piece of music I mean.
I think it's the Traken wedding theme or something it's called.
Yeah, something like that, and it's really memorable. It's a great little piece of music. The rest of it is just like a cat's walked along the synthesizer, and it's slightly too loud. It's just bloody awful.
When we did a episode where we talked about Doctor Who music probably a couple of years ago now, I remember making the point that I like a lot of the music in season 18. I think when the Radiophonic Workshop is given the task of writing the script, is given the task of writing the scores, they come up with some really wonderful and memorable scores. But I made the point at the time, I think it's disappointing that every story gets electronic music because some just aren't suited to it. And I think the Keeper of Traken is one of them. I think that a traditional Dudley Simpson string quartet with a couple of, bassoons or something in addition, or, a couple of French horns and a whole bunch of violins, that sort of a feel, or maybe a harpsichord or something. Real instruments that evoke that sort of Renaissance court feeling would have been really, really appropriate here. And even that wedding score, I remember it being on a cassette that I had of Doctor Who music from, I think, the 20th anniversary or something. even that, I think, doesn't quite work because it's so clearly a synthesizer of some sort. Had that been an actual string quartet, I think that would have been a much nicer thing. I think they missed a trick by not having, in inverted commas, real music or real instruments.
Yeah, that wedding score would have sounded better, that's for sure. But as a little piece of music, I think it's quite competent as music, like music notation on the page. I think it's very good. But yeah, I totally agree with the music. At times it's just overwhelming, overpowering, and just awful to listen to.
What do you make of Traken itself?
I love it. I was about to bring this up. I was about to say, wouldn't it be great if we could go back to Traken? And I guess we can. We can go back to it in the past. I just love this fairy tale feel to it. This little grove that they go out to. The guys protecting the grove. They're sort of part, groundskeepers, part security guards, I guess.
Yes.
This society that dresses and acts in a certain way but is highly technological, as I mentioned earlier. I love how all of this comes together. I find Traken quite an interesting sort of place, and it's funny, I was reading goth opera recently, and in that you sort of get a bit of an insight into Nissa's scientific understanding and knowledge and things she learned on Traken and stuff, and it got me thinking about Traken in general. I think it's a really well constructed, for what we have in front of us, 4 25-minute episodes of a children's television show. It's a well constructed world compared to what we get in many episodes, and I really appreciate that kind of thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. This is, I think, one of the things that really makes this a strong story, and that is that it is a world, or a series of worlds, in fact, that you suddenly understand. You get that they're a very aristocratic sort of society. You get they've held on to a lot of these Renaissance sort of vibes while still being highly technological. You understand who the consuls are. You understand who the Fosters are. Interestingly, this wasn't how Johnny Byrne originally imagined the society to be. He actually imagined it being something on that old, awful sci-fi cliche of having the scientist people and the religious sort of people, a la Meglos. And fortunately, because Meglos had already done that, they said, no, don't do that. But that was sort of where he was originally coming from. A point, though, that I noticed is that there is a little bit of a dark tinge to this society, and I don't know whether it's deliberate or it's just the way that in a lot of sci-fi, when a world seems perfect and a utopia, it often proves not to be. And it occurred to me that this is actually a very undemocratic sort of society, in that the way I think it works is the Keeper appoints his consuls, and then at the end he appoints his successor. So there's no democracy on this planet or in this union. It's really just sort of a benevolent dictatorship, and there are moments such as the bit where Seron enters rapport with the Keeper, where the Keeper is really quite almost scary in the way that he reacts to Seron and kind of just allows him to be killed, almost as a punishment.
Yeah, no, look, there's a couple of things to unpack there. You're quite right, and although it does make me giggle, when Cassia gets appointed by the other two consuls, is that legal? Because shouldn't they have a full quorum of consuls to be appointing her?
It is a very unusual thing where the Keeper said, okay, I'm appointing Tremas, and they've said, well, we're just going to lock Tremas up and appoint somebody else. And two people get to pick who the next Keeper for the next 1,000 years is going to be, and it's the person who just locked up her political rival.
And I know I say that in fun, but yeah, you got to think about it. Is that really fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Cassia and Tremas, I think that Sheila Ruskin's performance as Cassia is excellent. I think that Anthony Ainley's performance as Tremas is excellent. I never buy them as a couple.
Oh, no.
Cassia has some wonderful lines about how much she loves her husband, and Tremas has some wonderful lines about how much he loves his wife, but you never see it. You never buy that. I just never buy it at all. And I think that's a big flaw.
Do you think it's the age of them as well?
Yeah, maybe. And this is another point that I wanted to discuss with you, Rob. The timeline for this. Is it that they had Tremas and Cassia's wedding? The Keeper comes along at the reception and blesses them. sees what's going on and senses something's not up, and sort of ducks out of the reception straight to the TARDIS, and the TARDIS arrives pretty much the morning after the wedding? Or is it that a few months have flowed and they've settled down into sort of routine domesticity, and the Doctor arrives a little bit afterwards? How quick do you think the Doctor's arrival is after that wedding?
Gosh, that's hard to say. I mean, just watching it on screen, you sort of get swept up that it's all happening pretty much the morning after. But it could, in theory, be a long time after, as you know, weeks maybe.
Yeah, I'd always assumed it was, but on viewing this time, I thought actually no, maybe it really is, you know, a day or two after the wedding. In which case, again, neither of them act like a newly married couple, I think, would act.
No, and it's interesting because, as you say, they both give good performances in general.
Yeah, great performances.
They're doing great stuff, but you just don't buy them as a couple. For me, it's the age thing. How long has she been tending to the Melka and putting flowers at its feet? Is it 5 years, 10 years, something like that?
Yeah.
Since she was a young girl, whereas he's already an old guy. You know,
well, he's old enough to have a 18-ish-year-old daughter.
Yeah. And even then, it looks like he might have had her later in life.
Yeah.
For me, it's the age thing that I don't buy. I just don't... And I mean, I know in society, there are younger girls who go out with older guys, and maybe it's for power, maybe it's for money, maybe for both. You know.
Sometimes it's for love.
Sometimes it's for love, but not often, Dave.
Well, right, I'm not going to judge other people's relationships, Rob. You can have that one. Okay, well, those people who are romantics, right to Rob, not me.
Yeah, and I think, okay, it does happen, but it doesn't happen a lot. Agree. I don't buy it.
Let's mention Geoffrey Beevers.
Yeah, we haven't really... I mean, we've mentioned the Master and such, but we haven't got to Beevers himself. Beevers or Pratt? Dave, I think that's the question on my lips.
Gee. I think that Beevers is a more interesting voice actor. I think that Pratt was a more exciting Master in that he just looked that much worse, and in that he looked scarier, and there was a much greater sense of desperation from him.
Mm-hmm.
But Beaver's voice in this is remarkably good, and I think that does carry a lot of the story and carry a lot of his performance. I've actually seen and met Geoffrey Beevers. He was at the convention where I met Terrence Dix. That's that same convention, and so right. I met him there and saw him do some Q&A. But I actually saw him in a play on Broadway called The Audience, where he played the equerry to Helen Mirren's Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, that would have been very good.
So that was very good. So I have seen Beevers perform on Broadway, so that's a little side note there. I think he gives a remarkably good performance here, and carries the whole thing. I mean, you need to believe that Cassia can be manipulated by the Melka, and his performance lets you believe that.
And what is telling of his performance too, the first couple of episodes at least, he's just a bit of a voice and a hand. You don't even see him.
Yeah, he's a voice, then he's a voice and a hand, and then he's sort of a voice and a silhouette. Then you see the whole thing, and then the Doctor meets him.
Exactly. And when they meet, I guess there would be people in the audience who hadn't seen a Master story before. They might not have even seen Deadly Assassin a few years earlier. But when they meet, you know that these two guys have a history. And
yes.
You know, they could really go at it, even if you haven't seen all the Pertwee and Delgado stories.
And Tom makes the really correct, I think, acting decision there to really underplay. And that adds a sense of real gravitas to what Beevers is doing. Because Beevers gets to be the bigger bad guy, and I'm going to do these evil things to you. And Tom's very still and very quiet. And that, I think, really emphasises the balance between them. And it's a very good performance from both.
I do agree. So, yeah, look, Geoffrey Beevers, thumbs up from me.
Generally speaking, I want to praise the visual look of this story.
Yes.
Like the whole of Season 18. Season 18 looks amazing. John Nathan Turner has come in as the acting producer with Barry Letts as the executive producer, and they just make the budget work. They find designers and directors and crew that want to make this work, and the sets look gorgeous. The Grove is lovely. I think it works. Would it work better if they'd had a bit of location filming and it was an actual grove? Maybe, but maybe that wouldn't have been within the tone of the story. I don't know. The costumes are lovely.
Mm.
The props, like the look of the Source manipulator, that's a wonderful, evocative thing. Something as simple as the flame behind the Keeper's chair. That entranced me as a kid. As a kid, I instantly knew what it meant and how it worked, and that as the flame went down, the Keeper was weaker. And then the moment where the Keeper's death is portrayed so simply just by that flame going out, but so effectively. Yeah. I think there's a lot to really praise in the way that this was put together.
Yeah, and something I picked up on too, we often talk about in the 80s stories, the lighting being way too bright. Here, out in the Grove, the scenes are noticeably darker than when they cut to inside. There is a definite difference in lighting, and they've darkened those scenes in the Grove. It looks wonderful.
Yeah, and even the difference between, for example, the courtroom and the control room, and then the passages underneath, or the cellars and the like underneath. There is a real differentiation of lighting there, and then they really drop it, of course, for the death of the Keeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to praise that as well.
We need to mention, or at least I want to mention, the episode 3 cliffhanger, which is horrible. The moment where Cassia assumes the Keepership, having effectively sacrificed herself so her husband doesn't have to, which, look, even though I don't buy the relationship, I understand the plot point, and I get that, and I get her motivation, and her performance is wonderful. And then she has a TARDIS basically land inside her.
Yes.
That's a horrible death. And it's really so effectively done. She screams and writhes, and there's that effect, and then it cuts to the credits, and that's such a good cliffhanger.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that. That is a good one.
Any weak performances you had here?
You know what? I really don't think there is. I have a soft spot for this story, I confess. I love the fairy tale feel to it. Maybe that papers over a few cracks here and there. On the whole, there's no sort of actor who stands out. I think, oh God, that's that guy who's terrible every time I watch this, or woman. No, I don't get that.
Yeah, look, my weak one is Ronald Oliver as Neiman. Not that I think he's doing a bad performance. I just don't think he's quite hit the same tone as the other characters. You look at the way that Margot Vanderberg is playing Couture, and she's wonderful and Shakespearean, and John Woodnut is playing Seren, and he's doing all the, gathered our hugger-mugger around, and, he's doing Shakespeare, and Robin Soames, who's still acting today, he's in Victoria, actually, with Jenna Coleman.
Huh.
He's a recurring character in that. He plays Luvic, and he's a wonderful, lovely character. I don't understand what's going on. I love that. I think there's some really good ones in there. One of the things that I think is good, everybody talks about the Shakespearean influence of this, and there are clear Shakespearean influences. We spoke about The Tempest. We've mentioned Macbeth, even to some extent some of the Henry plays. But of course, there is a lot of Julius Caesar in this as well. Right down to the fact that Cassia is obviously analogous to Cassius in the Julius Caesar play. And I think the real moment that I think is quite a lovely little homage is that there's almost a direct lift out of Shakespeare here. Now, I'll read you a couple of lines from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and then we'll mention the line that's referenced. But in ourselves that we are underlings, Brutus and Caesar. What should be in that Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. Yours is as fair a name, which we get as named. Cassius is as good a name as Tremas. It's a real, as close to a direct lift as I think you're going to get, and I think that shows the pedigree and the fun and the performances of this story, which I think is an overlooked gem in Doctor Who's pantheon.
Yeah, that is very much a shorthand version of the Shakespeare, and agree with your assessment there.
So that's our thoughts on the Keeper of Traken, but we asked for listener thoughts, and we have got some, Rob. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, we do. Our mate over in the UK, Matt Barber, who tweets at Matt Barber UK, he does FilmArk Reviews there on Twitter. He says of Keeper of Traken, "It's great. Terrified me as a kid, entranced me as an adult. Theatrical and thoughtful in the best sense."
Oh, lovely. Local friend of the podcast, Rob Kelly, who tweets at Rob Kelly Tweets. He says, "Haven't seen this one for a while, but the last time I put it in the DVD player, I really enjoyed it." And there's a little love heart there. It's one of those stories that has translated well into my adulthood. As a teenager, I thought it was dull and didn't rank it. Doctor Who, can't wait to hear the show.
Well, there you go. You've heard
There
us.
you go. I think he agrees more with you there, Rob, that he came to appreciate it more as he got older.
Yeah, and I've been like that. As I said, I've done that with other episodes I really love. Kinder, I just didn't rate as a young'un, and now I think Kinder is the second best Davo.
Yep, I can understand that.
And finally, at DC Signal, who is Darren Signal, who often writes into us, Dave, says, "I knew Tom was regenerating soon, and because of the delays we were getting with TV and Z, I thought this could be his last story. I watched with trepidation, expecting the worst with every cliffhanger. But fantastic, he survived, and we got another serial."
Yeah, look, that's great. And isn't it wonderful that we've had 3 tweets from 3 different countries?
Yeah, that is very nice, and thank you so much for telling us your thoughts on the show. I know I put that tweet out rather late in the day when it comes to recording this episode, so I was lucky to get those.
But if you have your thoughts, please do write in and tell us, or tweet us. We'll be delighted to hear that. And also whether you've enjoyed the concept of a deep dive into a single story, something we haven't done. Do you want us to do more of it? Are there stories you think are forgotten and would like us to chat about? We'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, absolutely, because I particularly enjoyed doing this, just concentrating on the one episode, or one story, I should say.
I wouldn't want to do it too often, but yeah, I think it could be a nice one to have in the bag, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we wrap up the show, Dave?
We will. So we'll wrap up with a couple of emails. The first comes in from yet another country where we have a listener. So, Rob, you're going to take us through that one.
Yeah, this is... I really loved getting this one about a week ago, Dave. It kicks off, "Hello, Rob and Dave, and greetings from Miami, Florida, USA."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I've commented once or twice on your Facebook page, but this will be my first actual letter to y'all. I want to start out by saying this podcast you guys put out is one done with a lot of love, care, and respect for Doctor Who. When I first discovered you and started listening, it was for the premiere of number 13 season, since I got caught up from years of all but forgetting that Doctor Who was back on the air. I grew up watching it on public television like very many Americans, and was completely enthralled with Tom Baker's antics and adventures. Some older cousins would watch it, and of course I wanted to do whatever they did. From that era I remember the Daleks, Davros, and someone in a fish suit, but not much else. I'm guessing full circle there, Dave. Fish suit?
Yeah, if it was sort of season 17, 18, maybe, yeah. That would make sense. That's all I can think of.
Yeah. Once caught up on the new episodes, I totally stumbled across your podcast and have been loyal ever since. I even went back to download your discussions of my past New Who favourites. It always stings a bit when I love an episode or stories, but you guys don't. Oh dear. But there's a swell of pride when I love the same things you love. I even started listening to the episodes I never knew anything about because of the way you guys present your opinions and discussions. It helps me flesh out the era and understand the entire Whoniverse better until I get the chance to actually watch the episodes. Thanks for keeping me engaged. Oh, wow, Dave. I wonder if he's watched The Keeper of Traken.
Yeah, that'll be interesting, yes.
As far as your episode of Terrence Dicks, I was one of the people who didn't really have an understanding of exactly how much he contributed to Doctor Who. I knew his name because of how highly you both spoke of him, but to have you guys lay it all out on the table the way you did really opened my eyes to his contribution and influence. I have come to understand that he helped lay so much groundwork for the thing we all love, and for him to have also prompted a generation of kids to take up reading is the Lord's work. I'm very glad you re-aired it and that I had the chance to learn more about him. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to read this. I hope it makes it to air. Take care, y'all. From Sheldon Carnegie.
Well, there's no way an email that lovely wasn't going to go to air, so
yeah, exactly.
No, thank you very much. That's a really nice thing to hear from a listener.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sheldon. Love it.
And we have another email that came in tonight from your co-host last month, Rob, Richard, long time friend. I've known Richard since back sometime last century. And he says, very sad to hear about the passing of Terrance Dicks late last month. I was never lucky enough to have met him, but much like his impact on Doctor Who, which is equal to or arguably greater than a number of the Doctors, he has left an indelible mark on my formative years. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, I'm very much of the generation encouraged to read, thanks to the Target books, most of which seem to come from his pen, and these, together with books like K9 and Other Mechanical Creatures and the Doctor Who monster books, provided a lot of my early knowledge of the series, particularly Hartnell and Troughton, neither of whom I really saw until I was in my late teens. I went on to read a number of Terrance's other works, like the Baker Street Irregulars and the StarQuest trilogy, and a series with modern spins on classic monsters like the vampires and the werewolves. And Rob, that's something we didn't really get to mention in a great deal of depth in our Terrance Dicks discussion, but yes, he's got a lot of work out there. Richard's given a couple of very good examples of some of his non-Doctor Who work.
Definitely.
As I got older and started to learn more about the behind-the-scenes world of our favourite series, I came to appreciate just how much of what we accept as Doctor Who lore was established under his watch and with his involvement. Of course, the Target novels kept on coming with that familiar name on the covers, even though he was no longer novelising 8 to 10 stories a year. And even after the classic series ended and the adventures moved into other media, Terrance was still there writing new adventures for the Doctor. I know it became fashionable among the more rad authors and fans of the Virgin books to criticise Terrance Dicks' style and easy prose, particularly from the Target days, but his full-length novel showed his skill as a writer and just how much of his Target output was due to that dictate of the page and word count. I reread Exodus after hearing of his passing and still rate it as one of the best novels of the New Adventure range. Certainly something I'd agree with there.
Yeah.
It is perhaps a shame that he was not commissioned to write a television script for the new series. Maybe Peter Capaldi's Doctor might have been the best fit. But he leaves a huge legacy in the Doctor Who universe, and dare I say it, a special place in the affections of many fans. I know this old fan is sad to hear of his passing, but thankful for all the memories. I think that sums up our feelings very well. Thank you for sending that in, Richard.
Yeah, really good words there, Richard, for sure.
Well, we're now at that time where we wrap up our show. Once again, we hope you enjoyed it, and we would love to hear your thoughts on anything we've discussed, but particularly the Keeper of Traken. Now, a couple of things to look out for over the next month at a reveal of the next episode. At time of recording, Joker is out in a week's time, and I think Richard and I are very much looking forward to seeing that, and I think it's fairly safe to say we'll be inspired to do another review. So for those of you who listen to our occasional movie reviews, I think one of Joker will come out. It's probably about 10 days or so after the movie's out. We like to leave a little bit of spoiler space there for people to see it.
Yeah, Joker's an interesting one. I don't get out to see a lot of movies at all, whereas you, Dave, see about one a week.
Yes, literally, yes.
So we're quite different in that respect. But Joker is the kind of movie, if I found myself in the right place at the right time, I would go and see it at a theatre. It absolutely fascinates me the way it looks. I've also seen a lot of people getting antsy saying, this Joker looks good, but his Batman's going to be Robert Pattinson. And I keep saying no, because this Joker movie's set in like 1981. It's a completely different time zone to where the Robert Pattinson Batman's going to be at. And I also think it could be just a one-off kind of quirky little film. It's not meant to be, we're going to next see Joaquin Phoenix and Robert Pattinson facing off or anything. It's not like that. It's a very, very, very different kind of movie. It's just a Joker origin story by people who I don't think have adhered very much to the Joker's existing origin stories. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think it's a standalone movie that's just doing what it wants to do, and it doesn't want to be part of a bigger Batman universe. It just wants to tell its own story, and I think that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, agree. Totally agree. And Dave, you hinted that we'll talk about what's happening on our next episode, so I think I can exclusively reveal to the listeners that we're doing our next annual deep dive on a Doctor. And rather than getting people to cast votes across all the Doctors we haven't done, because who have we done? We've done Davo.
Well, we did Davo 2 years ago, and we did Hartnell 1 year ago, so that's why we decided we're due to do another one.
That's right, and we've narrowed it down to 4 Doctors we'd particularly like to talk about it, but the final decision is up to you, dear listener. We're hoping to do one on either the 3rd Doctor, the 7th Doctor, the 9th Doctor, or the 10th Doctor. So there's a couple of classic Doctors there, a couple of new Who Doctors there. Why don't you write into us, hello@thedwshow.net, tweet us at the DW Show, or reach out to us on Facebook, Facebook.com/the DW Show, and let us know whether you'd prefer us to talk about the 3rd Doctor, the 7th Doctor, the 9th Doctor, or the 10th Doctor. Your vote does count.
Absolutely. We've picked 4 Doctors that we think we haven't spoken too much about. We haven't done an in-depth look at one of their seasons, for example, but also ones that I think we both feel that we could talk about. We have stuff to say about. So I always like it when we leave a decision up to the listeners, and I'm looking forward to finding out which one we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I'd be rapt to talk about any of these 4 guys, that's for sure.
So please do let us know. Please have a look, particularly on our Twitter feed. Will we put a poll up on Twitter, Rob?
I think we can do that.
Okay, so we'll do that. But even if you vote via other means, we will add it all together. But look on our Twitter feed for a poll about that. But until then, I've said all I have to say, other than I've been Dave.
And I've been Rob.
And we'll speak again soon.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to The Doctor Who Show, the podcast where too much Doctor Who is barely enough. Subscribe to us on iTunes or listen through the website at www.thedwshow.net. Write to us at hello@thedwshow.net or send us a quickie on Twitter @thedwshow. Facebook.com/thedwshow is also a good place to find us if you're so inclined. Our version of the Doctor Who theme arranged by George Locke. Look him up on YouTube, folks. This podcast is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. Doctor Who, all names and sounds, and any other related items are trademarks and or copyrights of the BBC. All other trademarks and trade names are properties of their respective owners. The official Doctor Who website can be found at www.bbc.co.uk/Doctor Who.